On the morning of June 4, 1986, the town of Stillwater, Montana woke to what would be the first of a series of murders that would shake the heart of a once peaceful town. What first looked like an isolated act of violence quickly grew out of control. Investigators would uncover unspeakable evil that stretched far beyond the town limits. This is the story of how investigators pieced together the most chilling series of murders to ever occur at the time. The first victim was Ellen Marie Prinsloo, born in Stillwater, aged 42. She had worked as a librarian all her adult life from the age of 19. Her body was discovered by a co-worker who checked on her after Ellen did not open the library early that morning. Her cause of death was noted to be strangulation. There was no sign of forced entry into the house and no signs of a struggle. She either knew her killer or was caught unaware somehow. In the house, her body was seated, lifeless, as if striking a pose. Forensics found 3 distinct impressions in the living room rug. The injuries to her neck suggested she had been strangled with a rope of some kind. According to the neighbor, Ellen had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with her ex James. The detectives had their first suspect in James Anthony Rogers. James had a reputation in town for loud arguments and jealousy. He lived alone outside Stillwater. He dated Ellen for 2 years on and off. He'd often been seen with her at the Stillwater Library, as well as at bars around town. Investigators named him as a person of interest in the murder. Detectives brought James to the station and interrogated him for hours. He denied having anything to do with the murder and provided his whereabouts for the previous evening. According to James, on the night of June 3rd, the day of Ellen's death, he was at the timber processing yard, some miles east of Stillwater, working an overnight shift with 6 other men. That didn't convince detectives who were sure he was the killer. Detectives kept a close eye on James. His alibi had him at the yard by 10:07 p.m. But suspicions only increased when errors in the timesheet for that day made his alibi unreliable. Fortunately for James, a supervisor's log for the day also recorded him in the fuel shed at exactly 11:17 p.m. 2 other loggers the officers questioned placed him at the camp. They confirmed he only left the camp in his truck at 6:30 a.m. for breakfast in town, a window which made it impossible for him to be at Ellen's house at around 11:30 p.m., her time of death. With multiple witnesses, official logs, and physical receipts, detectives eventually accepted that his alibi made it impossible for him to be the killer. The investigation was back to having no suspects. Then, a few days later, the town would see another violent death. On June 11th, David Lorne, aged 37, a mechanic who owned Lorne's Auto Repair, was found bludgeoned in the back office of his shop. Same as Ellen's murder, his body was posed. There was a connection. Nothing was taken. Cash still in the register. His wallet untouched in his back pocket. The crime suggested the killer was someone violent and experienced, enough to inflict the right amount of damage to not make a mess. Besides the discarded murder weapon, somehow this time, there was even less to go on. No obvious motive or suspects. But detectives understood what they were witnessing. Looking at the crime scene, they knew. There was a serial killer on the loose in their town. June 23, 1985, hikers found the body of Michael Tomasz Novak. He was 18, a high school senior and well known around town for delivering papers and mowing lawns. Michael's body laid on the old rail line just outside Stillwater. It was not clear how he got there, though his cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation. What was odd was that there were no defensive wounds or signs he struggled with his killer. This initially made the police believe there was no connection to the previous murders. However, when forensics discovered a chemical residue, described as photo developer on the back of his t-shirt, they quickly made the connection. A toxicology report received days later showed Michael had traces of a barbiturate in his system, most likely in the orange juice that was found in his stomach contents during his autopsy. Orange juice can be used to mask the taste of the sedatives. Someone had slipped it into his drink. It was a clear change in the killer's pattern, one that puzzled detectives. Not only had a sedative been used, but the body had also been moved to another location. 3 victims in just as many weeks. The killer was driven by a strong compulsion. Different ages, different occupations, a strange desire to pose the victim, like in a photo. That pattern told detectives something. It wasn't incidental. It was a signature, a byproduct of the killer's habit. Detectives decided to focus the investigation and began cross-checking photographic chemical suppliers, hardware store, sales of photography equipment, and local darkroom users in order to narrow the list of suspects and hopefully identify the killer. In 1985, DIY film development was uncommon in small towns. A recent, repeated purchase of commercial developer would stand out. Was this the break they were looking for? July 5th. After canvassing several local stores, detectives were able to get information at a hardware store that kept a detailed ledger of sales inventory. They found multiple purchases of the same formula, a special order for one buyer. On a hunch, the officer inquired about the purchases. They were all made by a single person, a name that the store clerk recognized all too well: Gerald Phelps, the town's postmaster. Gerald Allen Phelps was 54 years old, charismatic, confident, the kind of man who easily offered up a smile that put you at ease. He lived in a modest house and was known to take photographs on his days off. His appearance and demeanor were nothing out of the ordinary. When questioning him, detectives noticed inconsistencies in his story. Phelps claimed he had not been taking photos recently, nor had he purchased developer. The detectives had caught him in a lie, and Gerald Phelps knew it. When presented with the hardware owner's ledger and the store clerk's account of him purchasing developer on 2 separate visits, his whole demeanor changed. It was like a switch had flipped. One detective noted that Phelps' eerie, calm, and soulless eyes gave him a chill, like he was in the presence of true evil. Officers knew they needed to obtain a warrant to search his house. In Phelps' basement, investigators found a small, neatly kept darkroom. On the surface, landscape photographs of Stillwater pinned neatly, but behind a false panel were photos marked with dates and names. At the crime lab, the results were damning. Photos of Ellen and David, taken days before they lost their lives, and Michael, possibly mere minutes before his death. Each photograph captured details that placed the photographer inside or up close: curtains, tire marks in a driveway, and even a tool bench with a distinct dent. But the darkroom photos contained more. Hundreds of shots depicted strangers, faces in grocery aisles, children playing in yards, people in laundromats. Some prints had scribbled notes on the back: dates, times, and the name of a motel or town. Names and places that didn't belong to Stillwater. That's when authorities knew this was not just a small-town killer but a dangerous psychopath. One who had been active for years. The FBI needed to be brought in. Stillwater Police Department and the FBI began tracing Phelps' movements. Postal employment records, subpoenaed under federal statute, revealed Phelps had not always been in Stillwater. He'd held short stints at post offices and temporary assignments across the country. Investigators found transfer and payroll entries for Rochester, New York, 1979 to 1980, and Santa Rosa, California, 1984, both with matching hardware receipts and references to film purchases. Motel registers and old payroll stubs stacked with the darkroom photos provided precise dates. The appearance of a new suspect and evidence in Stillwater leads to the reopening of cold cases. In Rochester, detectives re-examined a cold case. Margaret Elaine Kessler, 39, also a public librarian who had been found strangled in her apartment. The case recorded an unidentified chemical trace in her home that had been dismissed at the time. Old evidence, reprocessed with new techniques, matched the photographic developer found in Phelps' darkroom. In Santa Rosa, a mechanic named Vincent Romano, 34, was found in the back room of his workshop, his van still in the lot. Local police collected evidence that included photos found in a shoebox in Vincent's van. Photos that, when rechecked, bore the same distinctive lens flare pattern investigators would later tie to Phelps' camera. His photo was also among the victims. Once linked, investigators combed through Phelps' old addresses and motel registers. In several towns, local missing persons and unexplained deaths now fit the pattern. The scale of Phelps' activity became frighteningly clear. Brief postal assignments provided mobility and cover. His job allowed him to be seen but never suspected. The photographs, the developer residue, and the labeled photos told a story of obsession, compulsion, and violence. 2 more towns. The same pattern. The same trace evidence. The forensic signature consistent. The photographic developer residue from a brand favored by the suspect, found at different locations and photos taken shortly before death. The pattern lined up not just in method but in the chilling personal touch. The camera used to stalk the victims, then used to obtain his trophies. At his trial, prosecutors presented the photographs, payroll and transfer records showing Phelps' presence in the jurisdictions where similar murders occurred. Among the evidence used for the 3 Stillwater murders were fibers found in Ellen's injuries from a camera strap belonging to Phelps. A small blood stain on one of his pants linked Phelps to the murder of David Lorne. The photographic developer and a used bottle of orange juice laced with sedatives that detectives recovered from his trash linked him to the murder of Michael Novak. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. He was convicted for the Stillwater murders and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, what was lacking was a motive. Psychological profiling by the FBI suggested deep-seated, unresolved trauma, a traumatic adolescence possibly marked by neglect and abandonment. Experts believed his photography gave him the control he craved. And when that control slipped, it turned deadly. The picture painted of him in court was that of a depraved man who had allowed his innermost violent thoughts to take over. But his conviction in Stillwater was not the end of the case. Across the country, other cold cases were reopened. Some families got closure. But other possible victims from Phelps' darkroom photos remained unidentified, faces frozen in time that matched no missing persons file. Investigators believed he had been active for at least 2 decades. Unfortunately, his true number of victims would never be known. In the end, the dedication of the entire Stillwater Police Department and federal law enforcement made the difference in bringing a dangerous killer to justice. For a while in Stillwater, people talked about the ordinary neighbor who handled their mail, took pictures on occasion, smiled at them and went about his day. What haunted them is not only what they read about him in papers, it's the knowledge that a depraved killer lived in their community. Any one of them could have been his next victim. Today, few people remember, and fewer still would ever imagine, that such evil lived amongst them. Thanks for watching.